Brought to you by Pfizer.
In this video, you're going to see the future.
Are getting the breaking news. We've got a blast up there.
Hello there, you awakening wonders. Thanks for joining me today for Stay Free with Russell Brand. We've got a fantastic guest for you today. It's Dr. Michael Nehls, who's written this extraordinary book, The Indoctrinated Brain, which will help us to understand how propaganda, neurology, nutrition, and toxicity all intersect to create a mental environment where we become more malleable. In our item, Here's the News, we'll be talking about decentralization, Donald Trump, and abortion. Is decentralization the solution to polarization? Are we going to be able to create a better, fairer, more representative world if we decentralize power? And let's use the hot button topic abortion to analyze that after, I don't know if you saw on Bill Maher's show when he mentioned abortion and murder. Hey, it's a contentious subject and we'll be looking at it a little later. For the first 15 minutes, we will be on YouTube. Then we will be exclusively available in that sweet stream of freedom that we call Rumble, and we would love you to join us there. Perhaps you should consider becoming an awakened wonder, where you get additional content every single week, an exclusive video this week on There's Something in the Water. And this is actually quite germane to Dr. Nehls' stuff. Are there toxic agents that can create particular states, like fluoride? I don't know if you saw Rogan and Tucker discussing it. That's this week's exclusive video that you get if you become an awakened wonder. For a couple more days, you can use the code I surrender and you will get 1 month free. That's how much we believe in it, and you'll be able to join us for fantastic conversations as well. Now, Dr. Michael Nehls is a physician and molecular geneticist. He's a molecular geneticist. That's what he basically is. He's deciphered the genetic causes of various hereditary diseases at German and international research institutions. I've told you about his book, The Indoctrinated Brain. We'll post a link in the description for that now. We spoke about a variety of subjects. Are we in danger of creating a zombie society? And what was the true impact of the spike protein? Remember, this is the kind of content that we do live, and many of the questions that I ask were posted by members of our Awakened Wonder community. Become an Awakened Wonder. Here's my conversation with Dr. Nehls now. Hope you enjoy it. Dr. Nehls, thank you so much for joining us today.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Brand, or Russell, if I may.
You are very welcome to call me either of those things. Your book, The Indoctrinated Brain, has caused quite a stir. I understand in your native Germany you have had a lot of online success because you have explained some complex ideas that might usually be left in the realm of conjecture or even conspiracy, were it not for the empiricism that backs much of your work. Can you tell me primarily, Doctor, why you believe there is a silent war against our brains, which is a terrifying idea, and how that relates to events from at least 2019, but by your reckoning predates that by some significant margin?
Yeah, I mean, for decades, people live not according to our people's necessities, natural necessities, and the consequences are seen everywhere in the body. I mean, we see the circulatory diseases coming up in high numbers, but most prominently, we see a rise in depression and Alzheimer's. And depression and Alzheimer's are hallmarks of a particular part of our brain that is damaged based on our lifestyle, and that is what we call the hippocampus, based on its structure. It's a seahorse-like structure. We have two of them in our temporal lobes, and this seahorse is our autobiographical memory center, which gets destroyed. We see the result in Alzheimer's, but already depression is part of it. And what I found out and published in 2016 was a paper, Unified Theory of Alzheimer's Disease, where I showed that the production of new nerve cells in the hippocampus is required to prevent Alzheimer's, but also to stay curious all your life, to have a high resilience, psychological resilience, And what I've recently shown is that you need this production of new nerve cells to be able to think at all.
Well, sometimes thinking's part of the problem in my experience, but what is it that impedes the production of the neurocells in the hippocampus, Doctor?
Yeah, most simplistically, growing new cells means like growing anything. If you grow roots on the field, already in 1828, researchers found out, it's called the law of the minimum, that if something is missing, the growth doesn't occur. So if you have a lack of something, then you have a problem. So most of the problems that we had in the last decades is a missing of micronutrients, for example, certain micronutrients, but also there's a law of the maximum. Certain toxins don't go well for your brain, particularly the part of the brain that is so susceptible to damage, and that is the newborn cells that we require to be able to think. So there's always a damaging process going on, and that led to the highest rate of depression we've ever seen in the history of humankind in 2018, 2019. And as I already alluded to in a previous book, this is essentially the reason that people accepted everything that happened in 2020. But it even got worse, because what they accepted was a lifestyle that is so far away from normal, even further away from what is natural, that the damage was even aggravated. So we had an increase of depression by a factor of 3 in the United States. There was a publication out there, a factor of 3 in just 6 months going into 2020. And we had a really huge increase of Alzheimer's now at the end of 2021 in Germany that was documented and clearly showing that there is a severe damage going on in our hippocampal neurogenesis. And as I show in my book, every function that is based on the production of these nerve cells together is essentially what I call our mental immune system. So what we see actually is a breakdown of the individual and the individual immune system, mental immune system, and that, of course, if it happens to many people, the immune system of society.
So preceding 2019 and the pandemic and its social measures, and indeed medical and pharmaceutical measures, you are saying presumably as a result of environmental factors that induce toxins, presumably because of diet and pre-existing pharmacological medical interventions, we were already in this primed state where the generation of necessary neurological cells had been inhibited either due to an excess toxicity or prohibition or at least limitation of necessary nutrients or other components required. So are you saying that this is just a kind of inert process that's happening as a result of big food? Are you saying that this is a deliberate process that's being orchestrated? And did it significantly alter during the pandemic period? I recognize that you're saying that depression, for example, increased. It's certainly clear that a lot of diseases curiously increased and excess deaths increased. But what are you saying is what are the factors that could be prevented that are leading to these conditions, and how are they brought about, and who benefits from them, and is it deliberate?
Well, the question of deliberity is difficult to answer because nobody says, okay, that's what I did. But if you look at the circumstantial evidence, it becomes quite convincing. For example, we know that people, even if they eat well, they don't have, for example, not enough vitamin D in their blood. Vitamin D is a very severe problem in most of society. It inhibits the production of new nerve cells in the hippocampus, but also inhibits not only the mental immune system in that case, but also our physical immune system. And that was actually the major reason I started to think about it in the way I brought it about in my book, is because we knew already in summer 2020 that all the deaths that we've seen, the real deaths of respiratory disease, not the one which are just PCR positive and maybe they died of a heart attack, but the people who really suffered from a respiratory disease, we knew already in 2020 that it is caused by what we call a cytokine storm, an overreaction of the immune system based on the virus. But the cause of the cytokine storm is a lack of the regulatory hormone vitamin D. So that was totally clear. It was shown with as much proof as humanly conceivable possible. I mean, this was so clear that it was, for me, inconceivable why the medical societies in the world didn't push people taking vitamin D in sufficient quantities to save lives in the upcoming pandemic or next wave in the end of 2020. It was totally clear. We see the reduction of vitamin D in the wintertime, and that's the reason for the seasonality of respiratory diseases, not only COVID, but any of them. You know, all kinds of viruses have a field day when the vitamin D is down. So it was totally clear this is happening not by accident. There's a propaganda, actually, very severe propaganda against vitamin D. For example, Medscape, one of the leading portals for information or for healthcare professionals, published in many languages by the pharmaceutical industry. They tell us we shouldn't take any vitamin D. Vitamin D is not necessary. Actually, one professor in Germany said recently that the Nazis started giving people vitamins. And so if you want a vitamin D and ask your doctor for vitamin D, you are essentially a right-wing extremist. You know, you're actually following Nazi ideology. And this is, that was in Medscape. And for example, the New England Journal of Medicine just published in 2022 that even if you have a deficiency in vitamin D, you don't need to take any to prolong life. And actually, healthcare professionals should stop recommending vitamin D, measuring vitamin D, or supporting the intake of vitamin D. So that's the situation where I realized there's something awfully going wrong. There's an evil force behind that, trying to tell us that we shouldn't take vitamin D. But the consequence of that is, of course, if there's a lack of vitamin D in the society, then people actually die from the cytokine storm. And then I asked myself, why do they want people to die from the cytokine storm? Why do they want really to have people dying from COVID? Well, you can push the numbers up with PCR, but at the end of the day, you need somebody actually being killed, where a pathologist says, yeah, that's really COVID. That was really a respiratory disease. But of course, this can only happen if you tell people don't take vitamin D. There was a publication in 2022, for example, that in 2021 actually, that showed that it's a meta study where they looked at all the studies that have been out there at the time, and they made a calculation that at 125 nanomole per liter vitamin D, the likelihood of dying of COVID is zero. And that's actually the level of vitamin D you find in people living in the outside in Africa, for example. When you make measures there, you have exactly this natural level of vitamin D, around 120 nanomole per liter. And at that level, the likelihood of dying of COVID is zero. The German Cancer Research Center published in November 2020, that's 2020, before this whole mRNA experimental gene therapy program started. They published 9 of 10 deaths of COVID, real COVID, could be prevented by just raising the level of vitamin D in the society. And this was all out there. The whole proof was out there, but no healthcare professional, and at least not the majority, cared about that. And from the official side, we were told there's no alternative to the mRNA.
Now, we're stopping the interview at this exact point before you hear the answer to that exquisite and interesting question. To see the rest of the conversation, you have to click the link in the description. Come over to Rumble. And remember, consider becoming an awakened wonder. That way, you will be part of a movement that cares about you and part of an awakening that, Lord alone, I believe the world needs sincerely. Thank you for joining us. Click the link. Join us. See you later. Now, Doctor, it seems absurd to me that at the height of the pandemic, in all of its various iterations and permutations, there were on some, well, indeed, I think that talking about vitamin D along with natural immunity was one of the sanctioned and censored subjects, or some of the sanctioned and censored subjects relating to this. And of course, what seemed like somewhat rational measure at the time of locking people in their homes, closing beaches, closing parks, not endorsing exercise. It's extraordinary. Are you proposing that, along with a campaign to condemn and dissuade people from taking vitamin D, is part of a larger plan to generate the conditions for what exactly? A cull of the population? Control of the population? What is the benefit, Dr. Nehls, of this complex and seemingly downright evil plan?
Well, first of all, what they ensured is that they have a killing rate from COVID based on the lack of vitamin D, which, of course, led people, including all the measures that have been taken in 2020, that the only exit that people had was taking the shot. Okay, the shot itself was no salvation because, as it was already known from SARS-CoV-1, the spike protein is pro-inflammatory, highly pro-inflammatory, and the modifications that have been done with the bioengineering of the furin cleavage site in the S1 protein, which leads to an S1 subunit being cleaved off after the production of the protein in our body. This S1 subunit can easily traverse the blood-brain barrier, so it goes into the brain. And from my research on Alzheimer's, I know that neuroinflammation is at the heart of the blockade of the production of new nerve cells in the hippocampus. That means it's at the heart of the depression and Alzheimer's rates that we are seeing. So we should actually reduce neuroinflammation, but not enhance it. But what the spike protein does, the S1 subunit, it actually starts a neuroinflammatory cytokine storm in the brain, blocking the production of new nerve cells in the hippocampus and shutting down the mental immune system. And even worse, and now comes the second part to answer your question, if you don't produce these new nerve cells, and in layman terms, you have to see the hippocampus as our diary, the diary of our life. It records everything that we think, what we encounter, everything that we feel during the day. It records it. It's like a diary. And a good diary has lots of pages. You have to start a new page every day. And in order to start a new page, you need the production of these new nerve cells. If you don't have no production of these new nerve cells, you don't have a page turner. You start to scribble on the same page again. That means if you are fearmongered the whole day, which we were, and you have no production of new nerve cells because they are shut down by either unnatural lifestyle, 2020, or by the spike protein, then you start to override pre-existing memories. That means you reduce your personality, your individuality, and you replace it by whatever you are told under fear.
So, Doctor, you're saying that prior to the pandemic period, there were environmental, dietary, sociological measures that reduced the ability to create necessary neurological material to ensure a strong mental immune system and the necessary ongoing protection of the brain. And then, as if by some astonishing coincidence, the measures that were introduced during the pandemic explicitly to temper and control and expedite the problem made it worse. Now, you've got this diagram, which it seems to me to be more behavioural than neurological, called the vicious cycle of indoctrination. Can we have that up on the screen now so that I can see it and so that our audience can see it? Now, this vicious cycle of indoctrination, Dr. Nehls, can you talk us through this? I mean, of course, I can see the blockade of the hippocampal production and new index of neurons is a significant box, but it's a complicated diagram to understand. Can you talk us through the key points and how it pertains to what you've described to us already, please?
Yeah, I don't see it right now, so
can you, someone put it up on Zoom for Dr. Nehls? Also, you're supposed to have invented it, so you should have memorized it, unless your own hippocampus is falling apart at the seams because you're absolutely off your nut on Pfizer COVID booster shots.
No, I could have done that, but I want to make sure that I follow, when I talk about something, you can actually follow, So it's quite simple. The mental immune system, which is blocked by the blockade of this production of new nerve cells, leads to a reduction in psychological resilience, which means you have a lack of curiosity because you have to be resilient to open new doors, because everything that's behind a new door and new question that you might ask to a fact that you don't know might give you an answer you don't like. So you have to have some resilience to actually be able to ask questions. I mean, that's obvious. But if this production of new nerve cells is down, then you have not this curiosity, you don't have this high level resilience, and then you don't ask questions, even if it might be necessary for your survival. That's why I call it actually the mental immune system, compared to the physical immune system that helps you survive attacks from pathological microorganisms. We had talked here about attacks from pathological macroorganisms, which usually come on two legs. So in order to survive attack from pathological macroorganisms,
that's people. A pathological macroorganism's a person. Is that right?
Yeah, on two legs. I mean, that could be a bird, of course, but you know what I'm talking about. So the point is, these macroorganisms that could be toxic to you, that might impose rules to you that are nonsensical. You have to question them. But if your immune system is down, you don't do that. You actually fear the answer you might get. You fear even to oppose anything. And of course, that leads to a lot of other problems. Your hippocampus is shrinking. There was actually research out there published by the Bill and Melinda Gates Bill and Melinda Gates, what's it called, Foundation?
Yeah, just Foundation. Let me talk you through them. They're just a couple of guys, Bill and Melinda Gates. They're just trying to help people. They fund vaccines. They fund the WHO. They fund a lot of very, very fine journalism. They're a lovely bunch of people. It's one of the best damn foundations in the world. Can we go 3 ways on me, Dr. Nehls, and the diagram just for our stream, if that's okay, guys?
They published a paper where they showed that, we know that the hippocampus is shrinking dramatically if you have a post-traumatic stress disorder. But what they showed in a paper in 2016 or 17 is that even if you just think about a trauma, you don't have to experience it. Just thinking about it intensively leads to the same consequences. It's called pre-traumatic stress disorder. So you shrink your hippocampus by just being fear-mongered heavily. And so the shrinking of the hippocampus leads to a shrinking of your self-esteem, yourself. And that means you follow the mass. That's what we have seen in 2020. The media just had to tell us, well, this is what all the others are doing, so please do it as well. And of course, you don't want to be on your own if you have a dwindling self-esteem. And what I have shown is that you lose your ability for critical thinking. It's quite simply explained because every thought that comes into our mind, everything that we plan and what we want to do, these are just circuits in our brain, just brain waves. They are gone in a second. the only way to keep your thoughts and remember what you were thinking is by having your diary hippocampus. And without these new nerve cells, thinking, actually critical thinking, any kind of thinking is clearly impeded. And so you're trapped essentially in what Kahneman, the psychologist who died recently, got the Nobel Prize for. You are trapped in what he calls system one, that is stereotypical behavior, instinctive behavior, meaning you run with a group, you're not standing up and fight against the problem on your own. And so essentially you're left alone, and what happens is you accept every measure that is ongoing. Everything that is asked you will be done, and even worse, that here comes the indoctrination part, and I already alluded to that. If you don't have the production of new index neurons, you will of course memorize what you are told, particularly if it comes with a lot of danger. You know, if you're said, well, if you don't do this, the police will come. If you don't do that, your mother will die, your grandmother will die. All these things you will remember. But how can you remember if you don't have a new page in your diary? Well, you override pre-existing memories, and that's where it really becomes dangerous for you, because what people are left with at the end are people who only remember not maybe good things in the past. They only remember what we are allowed to be. That means people who believe that all these threats are real, that all these threats cannot be remedied by any nation by its own. So we need a world government. We need somebody who can overcome these worldly threats, because we are not only talking about pandemic threats. We are talking about climate change. We are talking about wars everywhere, which of course all of them could be world wars at the end. And all these problems cannot be solved by a single government. And we are seeing now the result of that. So, for example, in May, it's not far away now, in 1 month, the World Health Organization will be put into a position where they can rule the world. I mean, based on everything from pandemic to climate issues, they have the saying without checks and balances.
And now I'm delighted to bring you a short message from our glorious sponsors today. We're very happy to bring you our content in conjunction with our wonderful commercial partners. We make good stories out of bad news, but it's difficult not to let all these headlines swirl around your ever-awakening mind at bedtime. Millions of us face sleeplessness. It's an epidemic. It's silently harming our health and well-being. TWC Restful Sleep Formula, crafted by awake doctors, although they can sleep when they need to, like Dr. Peter McCulloch and his chief medical board at the Wellness Company, is the product we want to talk to you about right now. It's an all-natural alternative to melatonin. Did you not know that melatonin disrupts your hormones? This is packed with ashwagandha, delicious, kava, chamomile, and my favorite, passion flower. This powerful capsule has everything you need for deep, rejuvenating sleep. Purchasing supplements separately costs like $120. It's ridiculous. But Restful Sleep Formula offers a 56% saving. Don't just dream of better sleep. Make it a reality. Achieve your deepest, most restful sleep naturally. Visit twc.health/brand. Use the code BRAND. Get you $30 off at checkout. Plus, they all know our adverts work. Everyone's a winner. Let's get back to the content. Sleep well tonight. So you believe that these kind of, up until recently, rather anodyne, bureaucratic organisations, or at least that's how they were regarded, even if their origins were somewhat more nefarious, are on the precipice of being granted unprecedented power. And it's the kind of power that would be required to augment such an extraordinary and all-encompassing plan as that which is outlined in your rather wonderful diagram, because you're talking about something, you're talking about no less than a kind of a 360 sphere, panopticon of unavoidable and irresistible power. Now, can you tell me a little about the Great Mental Reset? I can hear that you've touched upon that subject, obviously, in your most recent answer. Pandemic amnesia, which I believe you've just described to a point, but I'd like you to be more just to be more precise and to use the terms themselves. And who do you consider to be behind these measures, or are we conversationally inventorying some of the institutions and individuals just in the litany we're touching upon conversationally, such as the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the WHO, or do you believe that even such high-profile figures and such observable entities are merely a veneer behind which true power operates?
Well, I'm a scientist, so I can't talk. I mean, my book is not about any conspiracy theory. It's. I only work with the facts that are available to everybody. And but if you look at Klaus Schwab's book, this dystopian book that might become reality if they actually if everything works out for them, and which I describe in my book. I essentially try to write an alternative view, an humanitarian alternative to this book. But the big reset, the Great Reset, is on their plan, and the Great Reset is nothing more than installing a socialist operating system on humanity, and this kind of socialist operating system we can abbreviate with SOS. Quite funnily, but this operating system, as you know from computer, when you work with a computer, if you want to install a new operating system, you have to erase the previous one. And my book describes how it is erased, how our mental immune system and our memories are erased and are prone then to accept essentially the new operating system without any questions. And this is the biggest fear I see. That we have now in the future, that humanity is not willing to fight for their freedom, to fight for their right to happiness, to develop on their own, and that we accept this operating system being installed on us. And this installation I call the mental reset. So before you accept such an absurd dystopian future, for us, you have to change something in the brain, and so I assume before you are able to have a great reset, you need a mental reset, and my book describes how it works. But in addition, it describes also how you can prevent it.
I'm excited to hear that your approach and rubric is not behavioral or sociological, but neurological. And I suppose that each of those taxonomies ultimately amount to argots that describe the same essential problem. It's entirely possible that we could talk about what you're describing, amnesia and compliance and systems of control, from a political and sociological perspective. But you are saying that you can track and observe through neurological impact and neurological change movements that must be sociological, that they are happening at scale. But I just wonder, as you say, that you're not here to speculate, that you're a scientist and this is based on data. Are you saying then that your sort of trial set, as it were, is based on the increase in people with Alzheimer's, the increase in depression, the ongoing increase during the pandemic, pre-pandemic, the removal of certain foods from diet, or at least certain nutrients from diet, the escalation of certain toxins, and what is the neurological sets? What are the data that we're looking at?
Well, we see that we have already a shrinkage rate of the hippocampus. So you have to see, if you, for example, are 70 years old and you're not used to walk anymore. I mean, you live in a retirement home and everything is served to you, and you just work maybe a few hundred feet, a few hundred yards a day. There were trials out there where these people are put into two groups, and one group actually walked for an hour a day, the other stayed, more sedentary. And after 1 year, the hippocampus was in the walking group 2% larger, 2% in volume, while the other group had a shrinkage rate of 1.4%, which is actually quite close to the average in modern societies. So while this trial clearly showed the hippocampus has the potential to grow a few percent per year, the data show, for example, from the biobank in Britain, show us that from about 20,000 people have been analyzed, there's a shrinkage rate of 1.2 to 1.4% in modern societies. So we don't live according to our needs. And of course, we can ignore these needs, but we cannot ignore the consequences of those needs. And anxiety rates, acceptance of measures that are harmful to us, not only to us, but also to our children, which is even worse. And the depression rates, the Alzheimer's rate, they were up to an all-time high and increased dramatically afterwards. If this is all done on purpose, I, from my point of view, I would say yes. But at the end of the day, the reader should decide as kind of a jury. That's why I put it out that's how I put it out in the last chapter of the book. But even if I'm wrong, if my assumption that this is all on purpose is wrong, it's still happening. So it doesn't matter if there's somebody behind it or not. We see a decline in cultural opportunity to develop as free individuals. This is declining based on what's going on worldwide with it, for example, the WHO and other groups getting empowered, but also by the mere fact that the brain is suffering worldwide, and that the things that are important for humanity, like curiosity, being together with people, liking to think, liking to develop your space and your opportunities. Yeah, the pursuit of happiness, let's put it simply, this is not possible anymore. And so I see, even if I'm wrong and there's nobody behind it, we need to stop it.
Doctor, what do you mean by the phrase zombie society?
Mm-hmm. Zombie is quite simple. I already alluded to when I talked about Kahneman. Daniel Kahneman got the Nobel Prize because he realized that we have essentially two systems in our brain to react to our environment. One he called system 1, which is the stereotypical behavior, and system 2, which we actually need to think. And system 2, as I have shown, is requiring the production of new nerve cells. So if we are not producing these new nerve cells in the hippocampus, then we essentially stuck with system 1, and we can only behave stereotypically. Another Nobel Prize winner, Francis Crick, published in 2003 a seminal paper on a framework of consciousness. Where in the brain might be our consciousness? Where is the neuronal correlate for consciousness? And he said that system 1, he related system 1 as the zombie mode. So a person that doesn't act consciously, but just reacts stereotypically to whatever happens around him. So this stereotypical system 1 behavior, he called it zombie mode. And of course, if people are not able to activate system 2 because the production of these nerve cells is attacked and down, then we are all stuck in a zombie mode. And I don't want to live in a society where the majority are zombies.
I see. So system 1 is a set of, we could almost say, synaptic circuits that are well worn and tightly woven, from which we cannot break out without the ability for intuitive action, spontaneity, the ability to respond in the moment to external stimuli. It's almost like we're in a Skinner-esque stimulant response nightmare, that in the maze of our own mind, we walk only predetermined pathways, marionetted by the manipulations of as yet unseen entities. And as you say, we cannot yet even begin to allude to who those individuals or what those systems might be, other than by looking at what the symptoms are of their manipulation and who benefits from their current agenda. But I wonder if I might ask a few questions from our community, Dr. Nehls.
Please do. Please go ahead.
Here they are. At Roselle asks, does Dr. Nehls agree that males have denser or more neurons in the hippocampus?
Males should have more? I don't think so, no.
Sexist. Bonnie Boo, I'm wondering if there's any research being done or already available on effective ways to reverse the effects of mRNA in the body.
Yeah, actually, I'm pushing very hard at the moment for the last 3 or 4 months. An anti-inflammatory, anti-neuroinflammatory agent, which should be available to everybody, but it isn't because it's not accepted by the World Health Organization as essential. That's a really big problem. So please, everybody, go on my website, on my Substack or on my US or English website, because there you find a large article on lithium, low-dose lithium, essential dose lithium. Lithium is the most potent molecule stopping the neuroinflammation being brought about by the S1 subunit entering the brain. So you can stop it, and you actually can get rid of the brain fog very efficiently. So that's one thing. The other thing is lithium is activating what we call microphagia. That is the eating off molecules that are not working well, which are or alien molecules in our brain or in our body. It's kind of a reurination process. So lithium should be essential. I'm pushing very hard for years to prove its essentiality, but it's for example the only substance at low dose that can stop the Alzheimer's progression by the mere fact that it inhibits neuroinflammation. So I have seen really good results now. Also other kinds, for example, of neuroinflammation, people who are stressed, for example, children with attention deficit disorder are really stressed children, and we see amazing effects with low-dose lithium.
Doctor, you won't be satisfied, will you, till people are just sat around drinking vitamin D and lithium and causing uprisings? Grounded Angie asks, perhaps ask Dr. Nehls what you think, Doctor, about self-talk, the mind-body connection and neuroplasticity.
Yeah, neuroplasticity is at the heart of everything that we are doing. I mean, we are emerging every day as a new person. When we sleep, everything is rewired, or many things are rewired. The plasticity is most efficiently or most obviously seen by the production of new nerve cells in the hippocampus. I mean, producing new cells, in new nerve cells, new brain cells, is plasticity at its best. And of course, self-talk is very important. In my formula against indoctrination, the ability to talk to yourself and reconsider what you are doing, stepping essentially outside of yourself and look at yourself and see where you are and where you are heading. I think this is very important for mental health, and I can only support that.
At Shaman711 asks, does Dr. Nehls have any opinion on the role of psilocybin in rescuing or aiding our mental immune system? And he included a photograph of himself in his pants. I don't know why he did that.
I think actually there are many compounds out there which stimulate the production of new nerve cells, and this is one of them. So at low dose, actually, but you don't need them. I mean, nature has given us very simple possibilities to enhance the production of new nerve cells. Just being out in the sun, walking, doing some sport, being socially active, all these things are fertilizers for our brain. For example, if you just look into the eyes of your dog, for example, or of your wife, that would be better. But just being in contact with another being activates the production of oxytocin. And oxytocin is the most potent activator of neurogenesis in the hippocampus. So that's why the unsocial distancing was so detrimental to people.
What if your dog and wife is the same person? What then, Dr. Nehls? How do we ever solve this enigma? We've posted Dr. Nehls' website and Substack, I've noticed, Laura, would have done that. I saw it go up, guys, so it's all in there, as well as the diagram from earlier in the conversation. So it's almost as if then the preconditions to the pandemic itself, the medical and sociological measures during the pandemic all had a singular trajectory. Is that fair to say that?
Yeah, absolutely. There's not a single thing that happened that I can disregard essentially as not being supporting this fact. In fact, many things I couldn't explain beforehand became explained afterwards. For example, we knew from a sufficient number of data that everything was planned well ahead. And at the same time, our government imposed new rules on a daily basis, like if they were not knowing what they are doing. But if you want to really want to make sure that the hippocampus overrides previous memories, you have to change the story daily. You have to change the story, otherwise it's not interesting for the hippocampus anymore, and he wouldn't store the information. So by just changing the rules every day, you make sure that the overriding of the hippocampus takes place. So, in fact, from this perspective, the behavior of our government, and probably all governments worldwide, can be explained. They knew exactly what they were doing.
That's very scary. Christine Hart asks, or states actually, I've read a lot about epigenetics being the key that turns on and off genetic predisposition. And she would like your thoughts on this, please.
Yeah, sure. We know, for example, if you are highly stressed, post-traumatic stress syndrome, or what I alluded to, pre-traumatic stress syndrome, leads to epigenetic changes in your brain, particularly in the hippocampus. For example, the receptor for steroid hormones, corticosteroid, is downregulated. And that leads to the fact that our hippocampus, which has a sensor for the stress level and is in a position where he can judge, is the stress level adequate for the situation or is it not, has a problem if you have an epigenetic downturn of the receptor. And that's very problematic. The problem you can only overcome by the production of new nerve cells that have not this epigenetic imprinting.
Do you believe that we ought try to create conditions and environments that replicate the environments within which we evolved, eating food that's available seasonally, living where possible in natural environments, avoiding processed foods and highly processed toxins in all their forms unless necessary? And are we saying that it would be better to naturally access vitamin D? And if that is the case, I don't know how the hell we get ourselves on lithium. I mean, people in the chat are saying they're going to be sucking on batteries to get their gums on some sweet, sweet lithium, they're calling it. They've gone out of control in there. So I wonder, do you think, generally speaking, we ought try to replicate the conditions within which we evolved?
Yeah, actually, you find in my book the formula against indoctrination, which is actually a formula against Alzheimer's and other books of mine. And in this formula, I show what are the areas of our life that need to be, where we have to put some attention to, where we see a difference, what our natural needs are and what our behavior is. And you find lots of information on that. And so my advice is we don't have to go back into and live in caves like in the Stone Age. We don't have to do that. We just have to recognize in what areas we have a lack of something, and make this lack disappear. So we need a few hours of maybe 1 or 2 hours of being physically active a day. We need maybe 1 or 2 hours to be socially active. We need a few hours of sleep. And when we eat something, we have to make sure that we don't have any deficiencies, and then the problem is solved.
Dr. Nehls, thank you so much for joining us today. The Indoctrinated Brain by the fantastic Dr. Michael Nehls is available now. We'll post a link for you in the description. Thank you for joining us for this fantastic, illuminating and educational conversation, Doctor.
Oh, I thank you. It was so much fun.
It was good, wasn't it? There were some good jokes. It was quite silly.
I love that. Thanks.
Thank you. You lot in the chat, thanks for coming. We'll be back on in a minute for the live stream show. I hope you're happy with that. And as the team Stay Free has just said, thank you for your questions and contributions. See you soon. I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Dr. Michael Nehls. Please consider getting this fantastic book, which I think will illuminate and educate you and give you the tools to confront a system that's plainly trying to propagandize and intoxicate you into internal incarceration. This time next year, we will be toasting sweet freedom in this glorious crow fart mug that you can get 25% off if you order it right now. If you use the code I Surrender, remember, you can become an Awakened Wonder where you get additional content every single month. Now, you will be aware that we believe very strongly in decentralization. And in Here's the News today, we'll be talking about Donald Trump and abortion. Donald Trump's been criticized by both the Democrats and Republicans for saying that laws around abortion should be left to individual states. What is the opposition to federal decision-making really about? And in an increasingly polarized country, is it possible that decentralizing power could unite the nation? Here's the news? No, here's the effing news.
No, here's the fucking news.
Donald Trump has been criticized by the Democrats and Republicans for saying laws around abortion should be decided by individual states. But in an increasingly polarized America, isn't decentralization the very answer that we will all be considering? Isn't it curious that Donald Trump has outraged almost everyone by saying that abortion laws ought be left to individual states? Do you not agree that decentralization and moving power closer to the people affected by it has to be the solution, not with just regard to a contentious issue like abortion, around which women's rights arguments coalesce and former taxonomies such as the left and the right appear to find fissure and opposition, but all decisions. Generally speaking, shouldn't democracy be as close as possible to the people affected by the decisions that are made? Conversely, isn't it terrifying when we discover that decisions are made by people who will not be affected by the decisions that they make? So, we'll look for a moment about the ever contentious issue of abortion, but we will examine more closely the idea of federalization or decentralization, or the ability of states or even smaller communities to determine how their money is spent, how they are governed, how they commune and communicate, how their judiciary is constructed, because surely in a polarized culture, the divestment of power is necessary.
It was supposed to be Donald Trump's clarifying statement on abortion. A 4-minute video released on his Truth social media platform.
Many will have a different number of weeks, or some will have more conservative than others.
The former president and presumptive Republican nominee stopping well short of endorsing what many of his supporters are calling for, a national ban, saying each state should have its own laws.
At the end of the day, this is all about the will of the people.
What do we want? Freedom!
Polls show the majority of Americans support access to abortion. Trump is effectively endorsing a patchwork of state bans and laws that have emerged since the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, a court decision that had given women the right to abortions across America for decades.
Like Ronald Reagan, I am strongly in favor of exceptions for rape, incest, and life of the mother. You must follow your heart on this issue.
The abortion debate.
Republican Senator Lindsey Graham, who supports a nationwide 15-week ban, said he respectfully disagrees with Trump. In a video posted to X, President Biden responded directly to Trump's statement.
Donald Trump is the reason Roe's ended. If you re-elect me, I'll be the reason why it's restored.
Two campaigns digging in deeper in what could be a defining issue in this year's election.
Even from that short, relatively neutral news report, you can see that this is a divisive issue. Many people will have a spiritual position on a subject like abortion and the sanctity of human life. Other people will have their own perspective based on personal experience. Doesn't that in itself illustrate the necessity for a variety of potential solutions, not just with regard to the contentious topic of abortion, but more broadly when it comes to the investment of resources and the types of laws that a community might agree to? Isn't centralization always going to lead to division and polarization? Here's a curious moment from the Bill Maher show where British pundit Piers Morgan and Bill Maher discuss what the meaning of abortion is. We're all going to have strong views on abortion. aren't we? Because ultimately, human life is sacred. Ultimately, bodily autonomy on a variety of issues now is continually being discussed. Let's see where this issue takes Piers Morgan and Bill Maher, while we ourselves address whether or not you agree with universal laws one way or the other, or the maximum amount of representation in your community.
Actually, there are many countries in Europe where it's completely illegal to have an abortion. Poland, Malta, places like Andorra, so, and if you look at Germany and France and countries like that, it can be 10, 12 weeks is the term limit that you're allowed to have an abortion legally. So America is not such an outlier. If it does go to the States, I think a lot of Americans on the left do think that this is somehow a really unique American problem or an issue that only pertains to them in terms of the legality of abortions. Actually, comparative to Europe, it's not massively dissimilar.
But the thing that's crazy is at a time when America is facing so many huge geopolitical threats, where there's a huge tech revolution going on, where the economy is faced with all kinds of challenges, the idea that you're fighting an election around this issue seems to be, just strange. Back to the 19th century.
Well, not if you believe it's murder. That's why I don't understand the 15-week thing. Or Trump's plan is, let's leave it to the states. You mean, so killing babies is okay in some states? Like, I can respect the absolutist position. I really can. I scold the left on when they say, oh, you know what? They just hate women. People who aren't pro-life, pro-choice, they don't hate women. They just made that up. They think it's murder. And it kind of is. I'm just okay with that. I am. I mean, there's 8 billion people in the world. I'm sorry, we won't miss you. That's my position on it. What?
Bill Maher there, astonishing his own audience. And I suppose what we have in the subject of abortion is the necessity of confronting what we mean when we talk about rights, when we talk about humanity, when we talk about life. In a sense, it's such a fundamental ontological question, such an important spiritual question. What is life? What are our duties and rights over life? That it's odd that it's become determined by secular ideas like the left versus the right. I suppose one might argue that life begins at the moment of conception, when there is a flash of life, when there is the potential for a human life to unfold from that moment forth. And in a sense, what Bill Maher is saying is extremely interesting. He respects absolutists. The aspect of this subject that I've always found fascinating when I've spoken to people who have strong pro-choice views is that by entering into the discourse, we are mutually acknowledging that we are discussing something profound and significant. I.e., if you see a bunch of protesters outside a family planning or abortion clinic, again, depending on what terminology you prefer, it's not the same as having your toenails cut. It's not just cellular matter. We're talking about the sanctity of life. We're talking about consciousness. We're talking about humanity. I suppose where I arrive is at the point of decentralization, at the point of federalization, at the point of individual freedom and the ability of communities to set their own guidelines and laws precisely because of the complexity and because when it comes to spirituality, I have my own beliefs, but what are the beliefs that you feel so strongly that you are willing to impose them on others, that you are willing to say, I believe so strongly. Now, a lot of people will say, now, well, murder, let's say, we're all saying that murder of a realized adult human is wrong. We don't have problems with that. But I suppose there are subcategories of self-defense. The state commits murder. The state commits murder in war. The state annihilates entire populations if they can frame it correctly. So even with a subject like homicide, there are variations, degrees, vicissitudes, and qualifications. So with a subject like terminating a human life at some point whilst gestating, it's likely that there will be variation. And in fact, that doesn't need to be stated because we can see that from the political and cultural landscape. There's endless variation, as Piers Morgan said. Across Europe, there's variation. Across the United States of America, there's variation. And what's plain to me is that politicians from both sides of the political aisle mobilize this subject in order to create an emotional response and to stoke division and benefit from polarization, knowing that there are certain demographics that will always vote in one direction and others that will always oppose them. And then, as the other pundit on Bill Maher said, we won't think about economic issues and issues of power and issues of war and issues of centralizing authoritarianism. The reason that I am fascinated by this subject is not because I believe all life to be sacred, but I recognize and have experience of the complexity that's likely to come into people's lives around that subject, but in fact because of how we try to create systems based on principles that are difficult to understand if you have solely a material, rational, and secular perspective on life. If you say there is no God, there is no truth, there is no justice, there is no righteousness, we're born, we die, that's life, this is just a cluster of cells, if it's inconvenient to a person, they should be able to make whatever choices they want to make. Like, that is a perspective that people have. Of course it is, and people are entitled to have that perspective. Then from where do you undergird the rights of an individual? Because you're suggesting that there is some sanctity to the rights that we all have as individuals. In a sense, this issue with how it functions in opposition to centralized power demonstrates that all of us on some level believe that life is sacred. Either we believe that the life of babies is sacred from the point of conception, or the life of an individual is sacred and no one should intervene in the free will of that individual, and they have absolute jurisdiction over their bodies and any potential inhabitants of their bodies. That, in a sense, is a recognition by both sides that there is something in life that is sacred and that all of us want our own individual sovereignty. Both of those positions, in a sense, indicate that centralized authority will never work. That will always generate a degree of polarization. And indeed, is that part of the point? Are both systems in a two-party but ultimately uni-party system benefiting from the ability to generate polarization around certain issues that mean that we can't think straight when it comes to a whole variety of issues in which we might have more power and more control?
That's quite harsh, Bill.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not
Is
sure
that not your position if you're pro-choice?
Isn't that mainly because you don't like children? I mean,
yeah,
no,
exactly.
no. I mean, but if you said you're pro-choice. That's your position too.
Thank God for our commercial partners. They make our life better, and particularly in the case of True Lean's Everyday Wellness, which is an all-natural 9-in-1 powder that boosts immune health, reduces inflammation, promotes gut health, including vitamin C, vitamin D, vitamin B12, zinc, turmeric, and echinacea. Is a potion of pure wonder. Everyday wellness, backed by science, inspired by Mother Nature herself. All you got to do is stir these sachets into water and enjoy it. Unless you've got one of these glorious big bags. Look, this is like the parent. There it's sort of like cells that are within it. There it's infants, it's tadpoles, as it were. Control your health without prescription. Take that, Big Pharma.
We beat Pharma this year!
I'm feeling better already, and I can just feel Pfizer's stock price plummeting. Spicy citrus tastes like sipping on sunshine. Let me have a sip of that sunshine. The inner light of the Lord is shining from within me. You can visit truelean.com, code BRAND25 for 25% off. Use the code BRAND25, get 25% off. They'll know we work. I'll tell you what it feels like. It's spicy. It gives you a zing. It's life itself. Now, I'm sorry, my brothers and sisters, my aunts and uncles in Europe, this is only available in the United States of America. If you get some of this, if you don't feel the benefit within 30 days, Truelean will buy it back from you. Even if the bag's empty, you can send them this empty bag. You could even put something in there. I don't know, a stool, a rabbit's paw. They'll give you your money back. That's how confident they are in this product. Try everyday wellness for yourself today. You deserve it. Truelean.com. Use the code BRAND25 for 25% off. Let them know I sent you. It works well for us. God, this stuff's delicious. I can't get enough of it, but then I have an addictive personality. Let's get back to the content. Of course, let me know in the chat and the comments how you feel about the subject of abortion, your individual bodily authority and your right to regulate the bodies of others, or where you stand on the principle of termination and murder and the sanctity of life and all of the complexity that comes together in that subject. And when you eventually are forced to acknowledge the impossibility of some centralized rule, let's consider federalization and decentralization. Now, this is Chris Edwards from the Cato Institute. The problem with the federal government is that it has amassed such huge power over our lives that people get bitter when their side in the presidential race loses. Federal intervention in education, healthcare, housing, welfare, and many other economic and social areas has made people fear that the next president will impose policies they detest and view as harmful to their communities. I mean, I don't think I've ever seen Joe Biden as passionate as when he was pointing and snarling about Roe v. Wade, right?
Donald Trump is the reason Roe's ended. If you re-elect me, I'll be the reason why it's restored.
So obviously there is a degree of polarization, oppositionism, mobilization of tribalism in order to generate some gusto in a campaign that could be seen as what these two parties... The rise in federal spending and regulatory power has deepened anger and partisan divisions by trying to force policy conformity on a very diverse country. The federal government tries to impose one-size-fits-all policies on the nation when there is no national consensus. Federalism expert John Kincaid noted regarding federal intervention into state and local affairs, it is the root cause of polarization because it has nationalized so many issues, especially sensitive social and cultural issues such as abortion and education that were previously diffused across the 50-state political arenas. The cooperative federalism advanced by the nationalist school of federalism requires a national consensus on such issues, but there is no consensus. Requiring state electorates to implement sometimes hotly contested national policies appears to have considerably exacerbated national conflict in ways that threaten the institutional fibre of the Republic. As Washington has further encroached on properly state, local and private activities over the decades, the share of people who trust the federal government has plunged from more than 60% in the 1960s to less than 20% today. So whatever your perspective is on this issue, you don't trust the state on this issue. Doesn't that suggest that we have to, where possible, devolve and decentralize power? Isn't that indeed the underlying message of diffuse communication systems that are ubiquitous and fully immersive, specifically social media? Our ability now to communicate immediately, directly, to vote on a variety of issues, isn't that what we're avoiding addressing in order ultimately to preserve sets of hierarchies and institutions that benefit from corralling people together in populations of hundreds of millions, keeping us in a state of conflict when in fact we could just be going, well, this tribe over here seems to live this way, and that tribe over there lives that way. In short, the way that we lived for millions of years. Americans have grown less happy with the federal government, even as the number of federal programs ostensibly created to serve them has increased. That's odd, isn't it? So there's more social care, the American government's getting bigger and bigger, and people are less and less happy. What does that mean? As a 2019 Cato Institute study discusses, the solution is to decentralize power by ending federal programs in state and local policy areas. Polls show that the large majority of Americans prefer state rather than federal control over education, housing, transportation, welfare, healthcare, and other activities. Growing federal power has undermined democracy, community, diversity, and political goodwill. It is a cancer on American governance, and in the years ahead, there will be no suspension of partisan anger unless federal power is reduced. It may seem paradoxical, but the way to unite the nation and bring Americans together is to disunite power and disperse it out of Washington. So, oddly, according to this analysis, Donald Trump is right. The issue of abortion ought be left to the smallest measurable community. I mean, if you want individual choice, that's the smallest unit of governance. But if there are communities that have views, oughtn't there be some, I don't know, representative and democratic process within that community that establishes their laws? And if you don't agree with that, then I suppose you don't agree with democracy. Here's some advocacy for the principle of federalization and decentralization. When government is closer to the people, it is more likely to be held accountable by them for its successes and failures in the provision of basic services, the maintenance of order, and the fair resolution of local issues and disputes. Government tends to be more responsive when it is closer to the people. That is why democracies are more and more embracing the principle of subsidiarity. The principle, but the practice, I don't know. I think we could do with a little more of it, because I'm seeing a lot of centralized authoritarianism when it comes to censorship, when it comes to surveillance, when it comes to imposing laws that have, for example, come from a WHO treaty or from the EU or from the centralized US government, and it's not working. And actually it is working, but it's not working for you. It's working. If you centralize power, then you can be of better service, can't you, I suppose, to the interests that you really work for, because you've centralized all of that power and all of those resources, and you're able to pass laws that benefit, for example, the military-industrial complex or the pharmaceutical industry, whereas if the whole state of Texas, Florida, California, pick a state, we're able to say, we're not doing that. Now you're no longer able to serve your true masters with the same utility and efficiency. That each government function should be performed by the lowest level of government that is capable of performing that function effectively. Sounds like a good principle. When there are multiple layers of elected government, as in a federal or politically decentralized system, there are other benefits for democracy. Lower levels of elective office can constitute an arena for training and recruiting new political leaders. Imagine schools, hospitals, police forces, military units, all governed as locally as possible. Imagine businesses, corporations run by the people that work there. Imagine Amazon, not centralized absolutely, but every warehouse, every distribution center democratically run. What a terrifying idea for the elite class. And these lower levels of democracy provide a more accessible means for citizens to become active in public affairs, to question their local officials, monitor what they do, present their interests and concerns, and learn the skills and values of democratic citizenship. Most of us think that democracy is pointless because it doesn't matter who you vote for, you're going to get the same sort of thing, except on the key hot button issues like gun control or abortion or whatever it is that they're using to control you right now. In fact, what it should be is I'm just going to go and talk to this person and say, listen, I think this. Well, let's see what wins in the marketplace of ideas. Typically, it's difficult for most citizens and organised groups to get access to the national parliament or the central ministries. They need decentralised opportunities for access to decision-making power, and those points of local access are more likely to be responsive if they are accountable to the people through elections. Now, what I've experienced in my limited involvement in such communities is everything really slows down because you have to listen to absolutely everybody, and not everyone's as eloquent, and not everyone speaks so quickly, and not everyone can convey their ideas as well, but everyone has a voice and everyone has a right. So one of the key driving unconscious modalities of our entire culture, now I'm not talking about left and right, is progressivism. The idea that we're progressing. We used to be cavemen, don't you know? We was dumbasses. Unless, of course, there were lost and forgotten civilizations. And we're progressing to the point where we can colonize Mars, and technology will solve all of our problems. Well, what if that's not true? What if we should slow down a little bit and get in touch with the earth and get in touch with one another and get in touch with what we're actually doing? Maybe we should see it as an expansion out into conscious awareness rather than a telos towards some imaginary future where everything is sanitized and Apple Mac neat. Finally, decentralization of power provides an additional check against the abuse of power, of course, because it's immediate, local, and intercommunicative and responsive. Now, the obvious downside, it appears, is the potential for decentralization to lead to disintegration. A very legitimate fear of many who are wary of federalism is that in a context of deep ethnic and regional divisions, it can lead to the breakup of the country, as in the former Soviet Union or the former Yugoslavia. These fears are real, but they are based on a mistaken reading of other experiences. Divided countries have disintegrated at crucial moments precisely because they did not develop over time democratic means for the devolution of power that knitted groups together in more authentic, voluntary, and legitimate political union. When groups are held together in one nation mainly by force and fear, anxious minorities may seek to secede at the first sign of a weakening of central government power. By contrast, when the national government, under the fresh political circumstances that attend the formation of a new democratic system, makes an early and sincere grant of autonomy, the consequence is almost always greater stability and unity rather than secession. So in a sense, the argument that's being presented here is either voluntarily the systems, elites, and institutions that benefit from centralization cede that power and allow people to run their own communities. I think the benefits of such an idea and approach is actually demonstrated through the abortion issue, or it will lead to what many people fear America's on the precipice of: mass conflagration, confrontation, and indeed civil war. Now, maybe this is just a media device to create yet more tension and polarization and fear and dread, but it's pretty obvious, isn't it, that after the next election it's not going to be, well, the best man won, well done, is it? It's going to be, no, you stole the ballots, it's corrupt. Well, you did an insurrection. Well, you did a Russiagate. Maybe what we're experiencing is the failure to acknowledge a deeper truth and a deeper reality, which we can see playing out on technological planes right before our eyes. The ability to communicate, the ability to have democracies. And I feel that perhaps if we look to our history, the idea that we might live in tribes that organize themselves around their own cultures and their own principles, that seems to be a pretty good template. It doesn't solve all of the problems in the world, but let's remember, we're not competing with an absolutely perfect model, are we? We are addressing the fact that we appear to be in a time of massive cultural, ecological, geopolitical, financial, and environmental crisis. And no one trusts one another anymore, and no one trusts any of these institutions precisely because of the reasons outlined here in these series of articles, and demonstrated both in the Bill Maher piece and Donald Trump's casual suggestion that states should decide for themselves how to determine these issues. Wherever you stand on the issue of abortion, perhaps you will humour me further by looking into the idea of federalisation, decentralisation, because all it actually means is the maximum amount of power possible for you as an individual and your community. And if you really believe in representative democracy, if you really believe in yourself, then surely this is a solution we should all be considering together rather than endlessly increasing polarisation and conflict. But that's just what I think. Why don't you let me know what you think in the chat? See you in a second.
No, here's the fucking news.
Thank God for our commercial partners. They make our life better, and particularly in the case of True Lean's Everyday Wellness, which is an all-natural 9-in-1 powder that boosts immune health, reduces inflammation, promotes gut health, including vitamin C, vitamin D, vitamin B12, zinc, turmeric, and echinacea, is a potion of pure wonder. Everyday wellness, backed by science, inspired by Mother Nature herself. All you got to do is stir these sachets into water and enjoy. Unless you've got one of these glorious big bags. Look, this is like the parent. There it's sort of like cells that are within it. There it's infants, it's tadpoles, as it were. Control your health without prescription. Take that, Big Pharma.
We beat Pharma this year!
I'm feeling better already, and I can just feel Pfizer's stock price plummeting. Spicy citrus tastes like sipping on sunshine. Let me have a sip of that sunshine. The inner light of the Lord is shining from within me. You can visit truelean.com, code BRAND25 for 25% off. Use the code BRAND25, get 25% off. They'll know we work. I'll tell you what it feels like. It's spicy. It gives you a zing. It's life itself. Now, I'm sorry, my brothers and sisters, my aunts and uncles in Europe, this is only available in the United States of America. If you get some of this, if you don't feel the benefit within 30 days, Truelean will buy it back from you. Even if the bag's empty, you can send them this empty bag. You could even put something in there. I don't know, a stool, a rabbit's paw. They'll give you your money back. That's how confident they are in this product. Try everyday wellness for yourself today. You deserve it. Truelean.com. Use the code BRAND25 for 25% off. Let them know I sent you. It works well for us. God, this stuff's delicious. I can't get enough of it, but then I have an addictive personality. Let me know what you think in the comments about our conversation around decentralization, and consider becoming an awakened wonder so that you can join us live for conversations with fantastic guests. For example, tomorrow's show is with Colonel Douglas McGregor, and it was a fascinating conversation where I learned from a person who understands war, who understands the military, just exactly how dissatisfied many military personnel are with the current military-industrial complex-inspired projects across America. Now, you'll see that show tomorrow, but you could have seen it already if you were an awakened wonder and put your questions to Colonel Douglas McGregor. In addition, if you use the code ISurrender, you get early access to interviews, weekly book club meditations, exclusive weekly episodes of Here's the News. So please use the code ISurrender to get a free month. And I'd like to welcome our new members, like, for example, Tugwell 888, Yadam Wavan, Rocky69, Blue Eyes for You. All of you are welcome aboard. Thank you for being with us. Join us tomorrow, not for more of the same, but for more of the different. Until then, if you can, stay free.
Many switches.